Hello, everyone. Can you all see and hear me? Okay, I assume so. We'll take another minute just to wait for people to come in, but it is my pleasure to chair this session by Dr. Melissa Bohnert from the UCD School of Education. Melissa will be talking about children's digital futures, and I will be chairing the Q&A straight after. If you have any questions, either during the presentation or right afterwards, feel free to put them in the chat, and then I will get through all of your questions and Melissa will answer them. So my name is Chzhen. I'm based in the Department of Sociology. I'm very excited to welcome you to the Trick Seminar Series.
Great, thank you so much, Kat. I know we're waiting for just a minute for more people to potentially turn up, but while we're kind of waiting, I can go ahead and kind of further introduce myself and wait for people to trickle in. Thanks everyone so much for being here. It's really lovely to be presenting, especially because I did my PhD at Trinity. I graduated or completed my PhD in 2023, and have been at UCD ever since. And just this year started as assistant professor in the School of Education. And further than that, not only am I in the School of Education, but I specifically look at children's digital futures and the role of digital engagement in children's lives. So basically, this presentation will take you through kind of a very whistle-stop tour of all of the evidence and research that I've done in this area since I started my PhD in 2019. So I'll kind of introduce you to the area, what we found so far. This is the sort of table of contents for the presentation today. So we'll start off with kind of thinking about this topic as a whole. What does the evidence say? What are the moral panics around this area as a very topical issue? Then I'll introduce you to the idea, if you're not familiar already with the idea of Irish cohort studies. What are cohort studies? How do we know what we know? Then I'll take you through basically my research. So what does the evidence say? What have we found over the course of the basically 7, 8 years of research in the area? And then finally, kind of implications and limitations. So what are the limitations to this sort of research in general, as well as, where do we go from here? What are the implications on policy or practice or otherwise? So that's what we'll be sort of talking through today. So first, in terms of the background, is the sort of discussions and the discourses that we're having about digital engagement, children, adolescents, is it a moral panic, or should we really be concerned? I mean, it's very normal and natural to think about, I think everyone is largely concerned about the role that digital engagement has in our lives, particularly in the sense that over the past, handful of decades, there's been such a rapid digitalization and transformation of society, which has really fundamentally changed the way that we all live our lives. But specifically, when we're focusing on children and adolescents, it's really changed how children and adolescents play, how they study, how they do their homework, how they socialize with one another, how they interact with the world. With these changes, we've also seen an increase in the usage rates of digital technologies amongst children. So, between this rapid digitalization and this, rapid increase in usage amongst children and adolescents, there's kind of growing concerns about where these fundamental changes might lead. Another thing that's really important to consider with current cohorts of children is that these are also children who experienced sort of key developmental stages during the COVID-19 pandemic, which led children by necessity and by circumstance to obviously have higher rates of screen time, education, and schooling was done online. And this is also a sort of important consideration to have in the sort of complex puzzle we have about the role of digital technologies with current cohorts of children. So, again, as we've seen these kind of changing dynamics of how digital technologies are impacting childhood and adolescence, this, has caused growing concerns, as I've said, about what sort of role these technologies have and how children are developing, how they're maturing, and what sort of outcomes that they have. And I mean, this is, I think, across every sort of stakeholder we have concerns, parents, teachers, researchers, clinicians. There's a lot of, I think, desire to understand what's going on in this relationship. But the important thing to consider, and I think that's what I'll hopefully kind of take you through today and the research that I've done, is that it is really important in this area, as topical as it is and as easy as it is, I think, to uh, get very black and white thinking in this area. It's my opinion that it's really important to consider the nuance of these concerns and really focus, especially when we're talking about policy or implications, to look towards high quality data and research and evidence so that we can more systematically address those who are harmed most in digital environments. So we really want to make sure that we're understanding as much as we can the real mechanisms through which harm or risk may occur. So overall, in the body of research, there's a huge amount of variety, and overall, the research is pointing to this idea of variation rather than universality. So it's not this kind of one-size-fits-all measure where all children are affected equally by digital engagement or digital technology, and it operates within the broader social systems and social contexts that we live in. So family systems, school systems, socioeconomic contexts, and I'll expand on this a bit more later. Further, in terms of the kind of substantive effects, whether it's positive or negative, there is a lot of evidence that are pointing towards kind of small but negative effects of digital engagement on mental health and variety of outcomes, but there is a huge amount of diversity in the data. And part of this also, I think, has to do with the complexity of the area. So when we're talking about children and digital technologies and digital engagement, it's easy to think of that as just one thing, but there is a huge amount of complexity that's subsumed amongst that. So, for example, you have the actual digital use of children. So, how much time are they spending on digital platforms? What are they using? What activities are they engaging in for how long? You also have actual digital risks that are inherent or online. So you have obviously exposure to harmful content, excessive use, cyberbullying, sleep displacement, and then you also have ideas of digital safety, well-being, literacy as well, digital literacy. So protective skills, education around digital literacy and technology, the role of parents and supportive relationships in your life and how that affects your digital engagement. All of these aspects are very important in this sort of web or complex picture of digital technologies, which again can often be obscured. So that's the sort of picture of digital technologies, children and adolescents, and kind of where we're coming at this picture from. So let's briefly diverge now into Irish cohort studies. So what is a cohort study? So, a cohort study, if you don't already know, is a sort of longitudinal study that allows you to follow the same group of individuals with any sort of common characteristic over a period of time. Now, most commonly, what you'll have are birth cohort studies. So, this would be a study where you follow a group of children born in the same year and follow them at, specified time points over a length of time. This could be their whole adolescence and childhood or even longer. So they're assessed at different ages, and a really important thing about cohort studies is it really allows researchers to be able to track change over time. So you can track behaviors, experiences, outcomes all the way throughout the life course rather than having single cross-sectional snapshots, which don't allow us to look at sort of within person differences and trajectories as well. So as I said just there, one of the key strengths of cohort studies is the ability to examine developmental trajectories over time, in addition to the timing of influences. So how can early circumstances affect later outcomes? And this is a really important characteristic of cohort studies and allows them to have a lot of power and more nuance, again, than a cross-sectional study. An important thing about this timing of influence as well is it helps us to start to investigate temporary versus more persistent patterns or associations, and how, again, this kind of developmental trajectory comes together. Finally, another really great strength of cohort studies is the ability, as with many surveys, to control for confounding factors. So, being able to control for things like prior well-being or mental health, family background, which just allows for more robust analysis than other studies without these sort of factors. So, in today's presentation, I'll be talking about kind of two very high quality cohort studies that I've used in my research. So, the first one being, which many of you might have heard of, is the Growing Up in Ireland study, also called the GUI, which is probably how I'll refer to it a lot in this presentation. And so, the GUI is a nationally representative longitudinal birth cohort study that was funded by the Irish government, and currently it's still ongoing and is developing a new cohort. But the data that I was working with follows two cohorts, one born in 1998 and one born in 2008. The other study that I'll be discussing more briefly is the Children's School Lives study. So this is a longitudinal study of Irish primary school children, which followed again two cohorts, one from junior infants to second class and the other from second class to sixth class. So getting a sort of full perspective of the kind of lives of primary school children. And the additional benefit of this data is it has really rich teacher and school level data, as that was its kind of nexus, was in the educational context. So these are the two cohort studies that I'll be discussing in my research here. So the benefits of both of these studies is kind of a really good amount of data coverage, especially for the kind of very topical and time-sensitive nature of digital research, for example. So we have children from early childhood all the way through later adolescence that we can kind of explore associations and links between these kind of key variables interest. And particularly a great thing about these sort of cohort studies is often they have multiple participants in the sense that you can link home, school, and individual factors. You have parent data, you have teacher data, principal data, for example, in CSL. So this creates a really strong evidence base for being able to identify children which are potentially most at risks, rather than having kind of uniform assumption of effects across different groups. So these two sources, while they're not perfect, and I'll discuss that more in my limitations at the end, these are very strong sources that are available in Ireland to investigate evidence-based research around education and child well-being. So now I'll get to the kind of real substantive bit of the presentation. So what has the research found so far in the Irish context? So first, I'll be taking you through my sort of PhD papers, each of which focused on a different element of this relationship between digital use and well-being outcomes of children and adolescents in Ireland. And maybe this will also be of interest to you if you're a PhD student to, see what sort of structure you can have. So, all of these studies used high quality longitudinal data from the GUI, the Growing Up in Ireland study, as I mentioned, with a variety of sort of quantitative methodologies used. So, starting off with the first paper, this paper focused on the idea of cohorts. So, it analyzed data from the 1998 and the 2008 cohorts to basically assess what difference 10 years has made in the digital behaviors of children and adolescents in Ireland, as well as the relationship or the association between digital engagement and well-being at age 9 in these two cohorts. So, the really great thing, again, about having these two different cohorts is that we can look at, children born in 1998 at age 9, children born in 2008 at age 9, and to be able to compare across cohorts the differences in effect. The dependent variable that was used for this data was the strength and difficulties questionnaire, the total difficulties score. There was also a more nuanced subscale analysis that was done, but again, I'm kind of streamlining the results here. So the key findings from this paper were a couple key things. First, we found, and again, I think this would be unsurprising, is that younger cohorts, so those who were age 9 in 2008, 2018, I believe, those younger children engaged significantly higher rates of screen time than the older cohort at a similar age. And we also found that these children experienced or evidenced much more diversified digital behaviors than the older cohorts. Now, when we look at the effect or the association of digital engagement or screen time on well-being outcomes, we found that the most extreme rates of screen time, which in our study was classified as spending more than 3 hours per weekday on a digital activity, activity or on screen time, this was associated with a significant decline in children's socio-emotional well-being. And we additionally found that this effect, the magnitude of this effect, was significantly stronger in the younger cohort. Finally, as well, we have some data on activities, specific digital activities that children are engaging with, and we found that passive media engagement, so kind of just scrolling, watching things, was associated with moderate declines in socio-emotional well-being as well. So that's what we found in our first paper. Now, the second paper looked longitudinally to look at associations of, again, digital engagement on well-being, but with a particular focus on the role of socioeconomic status and social inequality in this relationship. So basically investigating, do we find differences in behaviors and associations between children from less privileged and more privileged backgrounds? And for this paper, utilized the 1998 child cohort data and looked at this group from age 9 to age 18. So, the findings from this paper, again, in terms of digital behaviors, nothing incredibly surprising. So, we found that screen time increased markedly throughout adolescence. So, in at age 9, there was only about a half an hour of daily screen time, which rose to over 2 hours of daily screen time at age 17 and 18. And again, this is a not a incredibly recent cohort. These were children who were 17 and 18. Let's see, they were born in 1998. In the late 2010s, basically. So this isn't even considering the digital transformations that have happened over the past 5 years or so. The other important thing that we found is that engagement with educational or learning-oriented activities was actually positively associated with math performance and pro-social behavior. Whereas when we're looking differently across socioeconomic status, we found that although for children from more privileged backgrounds, we only found kind of significant negative associations at this most extreme levels of screen time, we found that any level of digital screen time was associated with poor socio-emotional outcomes at all levels of digital usage for children from low socioeconomic status backgrounds. Um, so we basically are finding these key differences in the associations between digital engagement and well-being across social inequality. Um, for the third paper, then, this was again looking at a kind of similar issue, but looking particularly at depressive symptoms as an outcome variable, and to assess whether digital use was associated with depressive symptoms in young people. There was a couple further sort of sub-objectives of this study. One was to look at how previous digital behaviors throughout adolescence affect depressive symptoms in early adulthood at age 20, to look at certain exploratory path or explanatory pathways rather between digital engagement and depressive symptoms. And finally, we were also interested in how these associations might differ and vary by gender. And this again utilized data from the 1998 child cohort. So, in this paper, we found again a kind of similar finding that it was these more extreme levels of screen time. Basically, anything over 2 hours was significantly associated with higher depressive symptoms. We also found that heavy digital use throughout adolescence was also associated with higher depressive symptoms in later adulthood, so potentially suggesting a cumulative effect of digital engagement throughout adolescence. And then finally, we found that gaming was negatively associated, or I guess positively associated with depressive symptoms. And here is the path models, the explanatory pathways that were explored. I know there's lots of tiny text here, so don't worry too much about it. But basically, what I'll point out here in terms of the findings is that these were the sort of hypothesized pathways by which digital use would affect depressive symptoms. So here we can see that we hypothesized that digital use might be associated through decreases in sleep duration, decreases in physical activity, increased low self-esteem or decreased self-esteem, as well as decreased body weight satisfaction. The interesting thing that we found when looking at boys versus girls, females versus males, is that for girls, this top figure, top right figure, is that the only significant pathway that we found was through low self-esteem. Whereas for males, the two significant pathways that we found were through more kind of physical physiological pathways through decreased sleep duration as well as through decreased physical activity. And this was a really interesting finding in that it suggests that there are potentially negative effects or negative associations rather for both boys and girls, but that the mechanisms through which these might function might be in fact very different. Now, the final paper of the PhD was then focusing on this idea of parental mediation. So, first, it sought to identify emerging or dominant patterns of how parents mediate their children's digital use in Ireland. It was also looking at a lot of key factors, so sociodemographic background, environmental factors, and how these predict parental mediation methods. And then finally, looking at the sort of direct or moderating association of parental mediation in this relationship between digital use and well-being and behavioral outcomes. So we did some latent class analysis for this paper, and from this we found four key parental mediation typologies. So up in the kind of upper left-hand corner here, we see what we call the low mediation group. So this is a group that is characterized by uh, essentially little to no mediation of their child's digital technologies, so not really employing any specific strategies. Now, for the second class, which we call the technical mediation class, this group of parents is characterized by a focus on more technological restrictive measures. So these would be things like the utilization of password setting and PINs, child safe settings, things like this. So relying again on more on technological mediation. Then we have the third class, which we would call the restrictive mediation category. And this group is characterized by kind of rule setting behavior in terms of their mediation methods. So, setting rules around what content their child can see, what time, what devices, all of these sorts of things. And then finally, we have the high mediation group, which participates in both these technical and these rule setting mediation behaviors. So these were the sort of four distinct groups that we identified in the data. Now, going from those groups, we found that when we investigated the sort of distribution and the makeup of each of these groups, we found that the low mediation parents tended to be from low SES backgrounds. They tended to have much lower parental education, high rates of single parenthood. And while we found overall across all of the groups that, again, this kind of heaviest rates of screen time over 3 hours a day was associated with decreased mental health, we found that high levels of screen time were associated with increased socioemotional difficulties across nearly every outcome for those children with low mediation parents. So this is a really interesting finding. I think for a lot of parents, this might be somewhat validating to hear in that you could look at this result and say, well, it seems like if I'm doing any mediation at all, that is has some protective factor for my child. However, this is about 20% of the sample are in this low mediation group, and we see that these are already children who have the fewest resources and kind of the least privilege. So we see that these children are the most vulnerable to the risks potentially of online and digital worlds. So now I'll briefly touch on a paper that's currently in progress that I'm working on with that Children's School Lives data. So this is more recent data. The data collection finished up in 2023. And I'll take you through some of the kind of key digital behaviors that we saw, as well as some kind of preliminary analyses as well. So, this paper and this analysis is aiming to understand, again, the sort of digital behaviors of contemporary Irish children, as well as how this is associated particularly with academic outcomes, rather than the focus on mental health and well-being throughout those PhD papers. So this is a kind of cross-sectional comparison here, which is also a very important thing to note in terms of the findings. But this was done when children were age 8 and age 12 in our sample. So looking at this table here, this kind of brief descriptives, we can see some of the sort of characteristics of digital engagement in these two groups. So some key things to highlight, we see that approximately 42% of Irish children age 8 report having their own smartphone, which raises to approximately 85% by age 12. We also see high rates of tablet ownership as well as ownership of games consoles, etc. So we have really high digital engagement across the board. And further, when we're looking specifically at screen time, we see that amongst Irish 8-year-olds, approximately 28% spend over 3 hours per weekday on screens, and this rises to almost 50% at age 12, who are spending more than 3 hours per day on digital devices. The other, I think, very interesting thing from this data is when we were asking about their social media behaviors. So, just for a bit of context, if everyone doesn't know, is that social media platforms have usually a minimum age of 13 to be allowed on the site, and we report or our data shows that approximately 36% of 8-year-olds report having some form of social media, and this raises to almost, well, over three-quarters amongst children aged 12. So we are seeing that despite any sort of age restrictions that are currently in place, children are finding ways around that and are engaging on social media anyway. So, here's another table. I know there's a lot of numbers here. I won't go too crazy here, but this is basically some of the regression results that we had in looking at this relationship between digital use and academic outcomes. We were comparing a number of different measures of academic outcomes, so child perceived academic ability, teacher perceived academic ability, as well as standardized attainment testing. Now, the interesting thing is when we originally did the analysis, we were just looking at screen time alone, and we found that there was, again, in line with all of our previous research, that we saw significant negative associations at the highest levels of screen time. However, the picture changed, and we also added in the this variable of frequency on posting on social media. Now, when we added this in, we see quite a number of statistically significant negative effects. Now, I want to couch these findings somewhat as these are somewhat preliminary. There's quite a few more kind of robustness checks and other things that I'd like to conduct on this data before I would feel 100% certain or 100% confident in these exact magnitudes and associations. But for example, what we're seeing from these preliminary analyses, if we look at standardized attainment testing, is that, so let's look at this number here, this negative minus 19 or minus 20 approximately, is that we can interpret this number that for those children who participate or post on social media every day compared to those who never post on social media score on average 20 points lower in their standardized reading testing than children who, again, don't post on social media at all. And these are not pictured, but this model is also controlling for things like socioeconomic status, gender, I'm blanking on what else. I think single parenthood, a number of kind of key controls, and we still see quite substantive negative effects. Again, these are preliminary, but quite concerning as a kind of first look. So, what do we see from these kind of preliminary analyses? So, first of all, we notice that children today are engaged in much higher rates of screen time and engaging much more with digital devices than other previous cohorts. So, in that GUI data from those previous papers, we found in 2017 or 2018 that approximately 4% of children reported engaging in over 3 hours of screen time per weekday. And this is raised in less than 10 years to 27% of 8-year-olds having that high rate of screen time. Further, again, we observe these negative associations between the heaviest rates of screen time, but again, the kind of most interesting finding from these analyses is this that the frequency of posting on social media is really negatively associated with all academic outcomes at basically all levels of frequency, which is, again, a concerning finding that requires much more digging into. So, what are some of the key sort of implications and takeaways of this research and the evidence that we have so far? So, some of the consistent findings across this research that I've done is, and I'm sure that you've seen, is that we've consistently found that there is a negative association of kind of the heaviest rates or most excessive rates of screen time on well-being outcomes as well as academic outcomes. We find much more limited evidence in terms of kind of significant results with more moderate or minimal digital use. A really important thing as well that I think is something to keep in mind is these heterogeneous effects of digital use. So the associations and effects really do vary significantly across all different sorts of outcomes. So sociodemographic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, and again throughout the PhD, differences across cohorts, socioeconomic status, gender, parental mediation, as well as other digital activities that children might be engaging with. But I think particularly the evidence has shown that children from less privileged or low socioeconomic backgrounds appear to be the most vulnerable to digital risks and digital harms. Further, they tend to have parents who mediate their usage less, and again, this kind of creates a particularly vulnerable group. Finally, there is kind of concerning patterns with younger cohorts as, research is conducted with newer and younger cohorts of children. We're seeing that children are kind of exponentially or increasingly engaging in more screen time, more digital activities, more social media. And further, we're also seeing progressively larger, more substantive findings as well. The kind of trend is going that way. So, in terms of implications for policy and practice, so what can we kind of do about this? There's obviously a lot of discussion about how to regulate child and adolescent digital use. Recently, Australia has completely banned social media for children under 16. And so I always get questions about what should be done. From my perspective, at least given the evidence that I have, I think that there should be a real focus on policies that prioritize kind of equity-focused supports, particularly considering that those who are most affected seem to be those who are already most vulnerable externally to their digital environments. Um, there should be a real focus in that sense on digital literacy, risks, early identification of vulnerability. And further, because digital engagement, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, it permeates into all aspects of life. There needs to be, or there should be a continued focus on strong school and home communication around healthy digital habits, digital literacy, because neither schools nor families can address many of these issues, these risks on their own, and there needs to be a kind of more holistic approaches to these issues. Finally, in terms of limitations and sort of future research in this area, there are a couple of key limitations. There are plenty that I'm sure I'll discuss as well in the Q&A, but there are some key limitations to this research. So first of all, you have a kind of over-reliance on screen time measures, as well as a sort of lack of nuanced, really multifaceted measures of digital engagement. And this kind of has to do when you're doing these large birth cohort studies, these large population level studies. These data sets are not conducted only for digital engagement, let's say. They're massive and they ask a ton of questions. So they usually only have a couple that they're asking about this particular area. And the default tends to be sort of self-report measures on screen time. While this is really valuable data, and that's what we have, we know that children and adolescent digital engagement is incredibly complex. Again, it's nuanced. There's lots of differences in what activities children are using, how long they're using them, what are their motivations. All these sorts of things are, I think, incredibly important to further understand. And another thing that's really a limitation, I think, of the research in this area is that you're constantly on sort of a catch-up cycle. Digital environments and digital platforms are changing so rapidly that having good, high quality, especially these large quantitative longitudinal studies, by the time you've gotten the data, it sometimes feels as if it is already out of date. So there's a need to be, constantly getting new, most recent data to address the sort of most current risks and concerns of digital engagement. So from this, I think there's a real necessity for continued longitudinal research in this area and especially those that particularly centralize digital engagement and can ask more nuanced and complex questions. So there's a couple of these that are currently kind of in development or in progress in Ireland. So there's the Guide Project, Growing Up in Digital Europe is what that stands for, which is being conducted at UCD. It's one of the many partners. It's a comparative birth cohort study of young people's well-being across Europe. And there we will also have what's called the EU Kids Online study and some ongoing post-primary research at the ESRI. And then again, finally, I think it's really important to kind of continue to have this idea of heterogeneous effects in mind for digital engagement across vectors of inequality. So again, that we can make sure that we're understanding who is being potentially the most harmed, if no one is being harmed, and that means we can most equitably try to find solutions and practices for children and adolescents to improve their outcomes in the future. So that is it for this presentation. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. And now I think we can do a Q&A.
Thanks so much, Melissa. It must be hard to talk for 35 minutes straight, but questions already coming up. So I assume you can read them in the
Yeah.
chat, Melissa.
Hmm.
So, um, so far it's just compliments, but as soon as there is a question,
Yeah. Any questions about, anything? They can be quite informal as well. Um, Oh, but yeah, that's great that Growing Up in Ireland is holding a data workshop. It's there's so much in the GUI, so I definitely recommend if you're interested in quantitative methods or kind of large data sets in the area to definitely explore that.
shall I maybe kick it off with a question myself?
Sure.
Oh, no, I
Let's
won't,
see.
because there is a question from Elizabeth now in the chat.
Yes.
So if you can see that.
Yes. So, any thoughts on children's use of AI chatbots? Yeah, certainly. And that's again, kind of when I was mentioning there at the end, that sort of issue in this area of always being behind, particularly in these kind of emerging areas of AI, ChatGPT, chatbots, as you mentioned there. Again, we are really only just starting to be able to collect any amount of data on this. I do actually, I'm supervising educational psychology student who's looking at the role of self-diagnosis with AI and chatbots and things like that. I mean, I think, again, I don't have much research base for this, as I said, because not a lot currently exists. But my kind of key concern with AI chatbots generally is that their algorithms tend to function in a very sort of consistent in an constantly affirmative way, even in circumstances where, there should, if you were talking to a professional, let's say, you would get some sort of professional pushback or again not have all of your thoughts affirmed. This kind of becomes a real issue, particularly when we're talking about issues of mental health, psychology, self-diagnosis. So I think they definitely present a substantial risk. But at the same time, they also might function as an important social support for children who might not have real life support. So, yeah, it's a complex issue that requires a lot more investigation. Um, all right, I see also one from Catherine there. Do you have some data on the impact of technology on preschool age children? I don't personally have any data on that. The GUI as it exists. I mean, it in the younger cohort 2008, it does start from 9 months old, but they only really started asking even slightly nuanced digital questions at age 9. However, the preschool age data that I do know about and have read is that there's a particular lot of interesting research around the sort of physiological effects of early digital engagement for like preschool age children, younger children, in that, in the sense of how it again affects their sleep displacement patterns, their kind of critical thinking and pattern recognition skills as well, are have found to be significantly affected by high rates of screen time in early adolescence and in preschool. But that's certainly a kind of key developmental age of concern that I'd love to get more data on. All right, then, Owen. So, what might be the relationship between screen time and frequency of posting, which seems to be the larger issue? Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. Again, I can only speculate because, again, that data is not looking at, mechanisms or anything like that. I think frequency of posting might be a bit of a proxy for the level of I guess potentially intensity of engagement of children with digital platforms. If you are frequently posting, that means that you have kind of a often a deeper understanding and knowledge of digital platforms. You might have more digital connections, probably associated as well with higher screen time in general. So it might be something about the digital nativity that you get with these children who are posting frequently. But yes, I can only speculate. I'd be really interested to explore that further. Can you talk a little bit about the parental management tool and why you chose that versus parental monitoring engagement or the like? Um, so I think you're talking, yeah, a little bit about the parental mediation paper. So basically, what those uh, parenting classes, what those came from is that in the GUI, they asked parents, I think, what was it, 8 different types of mediation strategies and asked whether they engage with those or not. So, for example, those ones about, do you set rules about time spent on digital technology? Do you set rules about what time of day? Do you set passwords? All of these things like that. And then through those, I put those into a latent class model to look at patterns in the data. However, there are, again, a lot of different parental mediation strategies exist, and one, in fact, that's kind of missing from those strategies listed is this idea of active mediation. So, when parents are kind of creating dialogues and discourses with their child about how they're interacting with digital technologies, what they're doing. In a lot of the research, this is found to be the most positive, associated with the most positive outcomes as a mediation method, but this wasn't included in the GUI. So, again, these are circumstances that you get into a lot with quantitative data where you're limited by those questions that are asked of the participants. But I would love more nuanced data on mediation. Let's see. If you could provide parents with some evidence-based rules about children and technology, what would they be? Again, this is always hard. This is always what parents want to know. Whenever I tell anyone about this research, I say, okay, so what should I be doing here? What rules should I set? I think the most important thing, again, from that parental mediation paper, again, that I found is the importance, again, of almost of doing something. I know that doesn't seem like incredibly useful. But from that, again, that paper, what it seemed to suggest is that parents having any engagement with mediating their child's digital activities does a lot or can potentially do a lot for protecting against risks. But I think a lot of it, again, in terms of that active mediation, is about not just setting rules, but also having kind of active conversations with your child about what they're doing, why they're doing it. And this also helps parents as well because they can be educated on the digital lives that their children are living and therefore make more informed decisions. So I would kind of shy away from giving, specific rules about, you should set it at, you know, 2 hours, though the evidence does show that over 3 hours a day can be quite negative. So I would say maybe limit to 2 hours per weekday and make sure that you are actively communicating with your children about their digital lives. That would be the best recommendation I can give, I think. Okay, I don't think there were any more questions yet. Any more questions that anyone has or anything of interest?
Okay, I think I'll jump in with my question. Are there any interesting differences between boys and girls in either the GUI data or the children's school lives data?
Yeah, so um, there was so in that third paper. For example, we found differences across gender in the sort of path or the explanatory paths that we found were most significant. So we found again for boys that the associations seem to function through again kind of more physical. Physiological means decreases in depress or increases in depressive symptoms through again physical activity or decreased physical activity, decreased sleep. Whereas girls, the paths seem to function more through emotional, kind of mental health mechanisms through decreases in self-esteem, for example. So that was a really important finding. Overall, we actually find that effects tend to be fairly similar, or let's say the magnitude of effects tends to be fairly similar between boys and girls in terms of, both having the heaviest rates of screen time, being the kind of most significant negative association. So the kind of only actually key difference that we found is in those pathways overall, which is quite interesting in and of itself. Yeah. Thanks, Kat. Any other questions you have?
A lot of thank yous in the
A lot of
chat. I
thanks.
mean, you clearly went on a, I don't know if it's a sprint or a marathon, but it was very impressive, Melissa. And the way
Thank
that
you.
you're just firing on all cylinders, answering questions.
I hope I'm semi-coherent. I'm glad. But yeah, as well, so if you're interested in any of these papers or any of this going forward, again, I have a QR code on screen if anyone's interested. Actually, that third paper that I was talking about with the mechanisms will probably be published this week or next. So if you want a hot off the presses paper to read, um, you can have a look at that. Um, but yeah, I don't know if there's not any more questions. I don't know if we want to wrap up. Uh, another minute. Any final questions in the chat?
I mean, you started with mentioning a moral
Mm.
panic, and now
Mm.
45 minutes later, how are
Yeah.
you feeling about that? Do you think it is a moral panic, or it's something that we really need to be quite concerned about? You know, how worried are you really?
How worried am I? I am moderately worried, I would all say. Or maybe let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, 6. That's what I'll say. I think that often I don't know, maybe moral panic isn't the best word. There definitely is a lot of moral panics around this area, and I've certainly experienced what I feel is kind of the outcome of that which is kind of very black and white discourses about digital technology and specifically how again we regulate that. And I've had through doing this research, I've been contacted for radio interviews and things like that. And I remember I once had an interviewer ask me, um, are what did he say? It was is my son's iPad rotting his brain, yes or no? And that was the question that he asked. So I think often people want to have really easy solutions to these very kind of complex problems. So I think in the sense that the moral panic about it has made people kind of seek extreme solutions or things like that. I think it is a moral panic. But again, I think what I found in my research is that there's a lot of nuance to these relationships and these digital worlds of children and adolescents, and it's really important to kind of fully understand that to then, provide proper practice and guidance and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's always nice to keep things on the 50-minute mark,
Yeah.
just in case somebody has to jump on another meeting, and it's good to
Mhm.
have a few minutes to look outside the window.
Yeah, exactly. The beautiful rain outside if people are in Dublin. But anyway, yeah, I guess if we want to wrap up there, I'll
I
thank
think
everyone.
so. Unless somebody pops up a very urgent question in the next couple of seconds, I think we should
Yeah.
probably wind it down gently. Once
Hmm.
again, huge, huge thanks. And there will be a recording posted online, so more people will get to hear about your fascinating work.
Great. No, thank you so much for having me, Kat and Elizabeth. And yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or anything, my email is also there as well for you to reach out. So,
Excellent. So it's been a very successful trick seminar.
very much so. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.